Now, for more on this, let's talk to our Deputy News Editor, Khalil Charles, who joins us here in the studio. Khalil, good to have you here. So talk to us about this high-profile arrest, the daughter of an opposition leader. Who is she and why was she arrested? She is
Miriam Sadiq Ahmadi, Sadiq Ahmadi being the former Prime Minister of Sudan, who in fact was ousted by this government in 1989 during a coup. She's been very prominent. She's the deputy leader and very prominent press spokesman for the party. Her party is the Ummah Party, which is led by Sadiq Ahmadi. Yesterday, Sadiq Ahmadi came out and said that the government and President Bashir should step down immediately. And I understand that Miriam was taken from her home this morning, Wednesday morning, and returned back to her home in the afternoon to today. So it looks as though they wanted to talk to her and perhaps stop her activities, because she's been very vocal, both in Arabic and English media, speaking against the government opponents.
Scare her a little. And so good, she's back home. So the other big news today is that the government has decided to release some protesters. That's good. Indeed.
Roughly about 1,000 protesters have been relieved. This is surprising to the human rights people, but a great relief to the families. And I think some of the reasons behind the release of the protesters, basically overcrowding in the prisons. It's not doing themselves any favours having so many people locked up, but also it's a way of showing goodwill to the families and taking the internal pressure off the government, so that the families are no longer pushing for their loved ones to be released and are thinking differently. So it's a kind of a goodwill gesture, as well as trying to placate the international pressure against Sudan, which has been building. And Sudan have given the signal to the security forces not to continue to use live fire as they've been doing. We know that a doctor who was killed while treating a patient was actually shot in the chest by a live bullet, of course. And this has brought a great deal of outrage in the international community. So the government are being very careful not to use too much force.
Absolutely. And what happens next? Is there still appetite to keep on protesting? It's what, 6 weeks now?
Well, there is an appetite to keep on protesting. Tomorrow, the great protest has been called for the 31st of this month. It's now about 6 weeks. There's been sittings, there's been demonstrations. Today, also, professors from the University of Khartoum came out and also protested. You've got students across the country in universities that have been shut down at the moment. They tried to reopen some of the universities, but because of the student protest, they were shut down again. The schools have only just recently opened, so these protests are making the life very difficult for the government. And although they're trying to return back to normal life, it's been very difficult with the continual protests that keep going on. And at the head of these protests, it tends to be the doctors and the professionals who are leading the challenge. But I think that you're likely to see more protests to continue for a long time to come.
And Harry, an interesting thing here with Sudan, this is a country that has toppled leaders, but there doesn't seem to be someone to replace Omar al-Bashir. Why is that?
Well, this is the questioning at the moment. On two occasions, from 1964 and 1983, in the early 80s, the popular uprising actually changed the government. The government of Aboud in 64 and also the government of Miriam was also changed by popular uprisings. But at the moment, there doesn't seem to be a replacement, someone who can be identified as the leader of this party. And also there seems to be a disparate difference between the way the opposition parties are working. Some opposition parties are saying that, like the Ummah Party, the president should be removed. Others are saying there should be an interim government, and others saying we should stay for another 2 years until the general election is called and people can remove President Bashir through the ballot box.
Okay, Khalil Charles, thank you very much for that update on Sudan.